Bonjour et bienvenue à la deuxième journée de Quantum Days 2022. Je m'appelle Anne Broadbent, je suis professeure à l'Université d'Ottawa, département de mathématiques et de statistiques, et je suis ravie d'être animatrice de cette session. Let me give you a quick overview of today's events. Immediately following the upcoming two plenary talks, there will be a 5-minute presentation of the Colton Award. You will then be directed to the networking session and poster session. Later, we will have parallel sessions on quantum computing, quantum communication, and quantum sensing. The final event of the day is a panel on the future of quantum in Canada. This panel is moderated by Marie Diorio, president of Nano Canada. I wanted to thank all of those involved in the organization of Quantum Days, with a special thanks to today's co-chairs, Stephen Ryan, Kabat Hashami, and Eva Dupont-Ferrier. It is an exciting time to be working in quantum information science in Canada. And one of the reasons for this excitement is the great community of scholars and practitioners working in the area. Un des contributeurs de longue date aux sciences quantiques au Canada est Raymond Laflamme, que j'ai maintenant le privilège de vous présenter. Raymond Laflamme earned his PhD at Cambridge University Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics under Stephen Hawking. After postdoctoral fellowships in Vancouver and in Cambridge, he settled at Los Alamos National Labs until 2001, when he moved to Waterloo to become the founding director of the Institute for Quantum Computing that he led for 15 years. He has also been an associate researcher at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics for the last 20 years. As a pioneer in quantum information processing, he has earned fellowships from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Physical Society, and the Royal Society of Canada. Among many accolades he received over the span of nearly 3 decades, let me mention the J.T. Knight Prize from the University of Cambridge, the Top 10 Breakthrough of the Year in the Journal Science, the Ontario Premier Research Award, the Premier's Discovery Award in Natural Sciences and Engineering, an honorary degree from Université de Sherbrooke, the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, the CAP CRM Prize in Theoretical and Mathematical Physics, and the appointment as Officer of the Order of Canada. Raymond Laflamme served for 15 years as director of the CIFAR Quantum Information Science Program and is also past director of Quantum Works. He presently holds the Mike and Ophelia Larizidis John von Neumann Chair in Quantum Information and a Canada Research Chair in Quantum Information. About 10 years ago, he co-founded Universal Quantum Devices, a startup commercializing spin-offs of quantum information research, and 5 years ago, he founded Quantum Laugh, Inc. Please let me remind you that questions for Prof. Laflamme can be entered and also upvoted directly in the Whova app. And now I turn it over to Raymond Laflamme to tell us about perspectives on the past, present, and future of quantum information in Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Anne. Je vais maintenant commencer là. OK, je fais l'hypothèse que tout le monde voit ma première slide. Merci beaucoup, Anne, pour la très belle introduction et merci à l'audience pour venir m'écouter aujourd'hui. I was asked to give a presentation with a bit of history of quantum information science and technology in Canada. Well, I'm not an historian, so my first kind of thought was kind of to say no, but I said yes, because for a little while I've been thinking of putting a few of the remarks I will make into writing. And so to keep this for memory and for people to learn about things that work and things that did not work. And so mistakes on the way. So I think in doing this, I had to do a lot of forensic research through my emails to kind of check the dates right and all of this. And I emailed a lot of my colleagues in the last month or two. So I thank all of them for the many answers that they have sent to me and kind of keep me straight and kind of a lot of the details. So I thank all of them for their input. And before I start, I should point out that one of the fundamental assumptions, or should I say the guiding principles behind my remark, it is the belief that the impact of quantum information science and technology will be through societal footprint it will have, from the new knowledge about the world in which we live to new technologies that will improve life. So here's the plan of my presentation. I will talk about the early days, and the early days is pretty much a pre-2015, where I was involved with a set of organizations, CFAR, IQC, and Quantum Works. Tell you a little bit how it works and what were the challenge at the time. And then I will pass on to more recent organizations, CEFREF, and make a few remarks about the National Quantum Strategy. And then I will talk about looking to the future, and you will see during my presentation that I will make many remarks related to building ecosystems. So as Anne mentioned, I left Canada around 1983 for about 20 years. And I had very little contact with the science in Canada, except for a little stint as a postdoc. But in the summer of 1999, I went to a conference in Cambridge on quantum computing. And I bumped into Gilles Brassard, who was putting together a proposal for the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research called CFAR. And he asked me if I would be interested to join and kind of collaborate with this. And I thought it was an interesting opportunity. The Canadian Institute for Advanced Research was created in the mid-1980s to help Canadian researchers to be competitive. And particularly, they figured out that time was probably one of the most valuable resources and set up a program in a variety of fields and kind of with research in the university where Canada had made or had a chance to make its mark and offered teaching relief to faculty. I had learned a little bit about CFAR as my mentor at UBC, Bill Unruh, kind of had helps starting a program in astrophysics. And one day I was in his office and this gentleman called Fraser Mustard comes in, incredibly enthusiastic person. He was the person behind CFAR. And then I find very lucky, and he was a person very influential and somebody with an incredible vision, and he brought a lot of good things to science in Canada. So at the meeting in Cambridge, I learned from Gilles that CFAR was interested in specifically a program in quantum information, although Gilles' initial kind of proposal to CFAR was a little broader. And so to focus on quantum information, Gilles asked Bill Unruh, Richard Cleve, and I to write a proposal for a quantum information processing program around 2000. In parallel to the CFAR proposal, I got recruited by the University of Waterloo. That came a little bit of a surprise to me because once I had left Canada, I didn't think that I would ever come back or there would be an opportunity for me to come back. Science in Canada in the 1990s was pretty hard due to budget cuts from kind of governments. But things started to turn around in 2000. And Mike Lazaridis decided to give back to the Waterloo. Mike was the founder of Research in Motion, now called BlackBerry. And then Mike, to giving back to the country, he founded and funded the Perimeter Institute, an institute aiming at developing theoretical physics. Mike also wanted to do something with the University of Waterloo. And it turns out that PI was interested in recruiting me. But when I met with the director, the then director, Howard Burton, and Mike Lazaridis, I told them that if they were interested in quantum computing, they should really think about something which would be broader. They would need people in computer science, some people in applied math, some people in chemistry and physics and in engineering. And so, because the effort in quantum information is really a multidisciplinary one. Howard Burton told me that no, PI or Perimeter Institute would be really focused on theoretical physics and it would not be kind of such a broad area of research and certainly not an experimental component, which I thought was essential. So when I learned about quantum computing, however, he got truly interested. And then he thought that an institute at the University of Waterloo with an experimental component would complement the effort of PI and promise 100 million at the university to the university for a quantum computing institute. But there was a catch. The catch was that the money would have to be matched 2-to-1. Obviously, in the Canadian context, finding 200 million inside the university would be a hard job. But the president at the time, David Johnson, and Mike thought that he could turn to the government and get a fraction of that funding. That message kind of trickled down to me, and I needed to quickly learn about the Canadian and Ontario government and exactly how they work. I must admit that my first few times in Ottawa was pretty challenging. I had to learn to connect with people who had very different backgrounds and had to learn to align our motives. I had to learn to be able to explain why quantum information science was important. One person with whom I met and who helped me really understanding kind of how the system worked was Tom Brusowski, who was then president of INSERC, and you can see him in the picture here with Mike Lazaridis. Meanwhile, all this move to Canada happened. Gilles, Bill, and Richard and I learned that the proposal at CFAR was accepted. But it seems to take a little time to get something set up. And I'll come back to a comment like this again in a few minutes. In one of my visits to Toronto, something I learned to do often at Queen's Park is the headquarters of the Ontario government. I interacted with Mel Silverman, the person at CFAR, who was shepherding the quantum information processing proposal, or the QIP proposal. The week after, having lunch with him, he asked me if I could lead as the program director. So I went back to Gilles, Bill, and Richard, and we started to set up some workshop and a drawing list of potential members. The goal of the program was twofold: make Canada a forerunner in the field of quantum information, and then build a community in Canada build a community in Canada and to increase interaction between its members. The program has been great fun, and we had very many meetings across many places in Canada, and visited kind of many cities. And we even had one in Ames Junction in the Yukon that you can see up here. In fact, that was a very memorable meeting where we had not only new concept in quantum information, but also a very nice community of grizzly bears. The program has been renewed many times in 2007, 2012, and then it was taken over as the lead by Ephraim Sternberg and David Poulin in 2017. And unfortunately, Ephraim became the only lead as recently as the late David Poulin kind of passed away a few years ago. And although his contribution has been kind of remarkable to the CFAR program. So back at IQC, IQC needed to think about setting itself up. And so parallel things to what was happening at CFAR. Maybe it sounds a little naive today, but the fundamental question at the time was how to build an institute. So much thought has been put in doing this, but at the end, it was dissected into three pieces. One, to think hard about the vision, the mission, and the goals of the institute. Number two, find people who will help turning these into realities. And number three, find the resource needed. I initially thought that the third piece would be the hardest one, but it turns out that it is number one and number two, which are much harder. And number two is critical to kind of turn any kind of vision into reality. Although the potential impact of quantum information was clear to us, the path to reach that potential wasn't. I had to learn this in my first forays to visit the potential funders in Ottawa. It was for me quite a steep learning curve to go from a theoretician who did experiments, who had never done much administration, to learn how government makes decisions. Thanks again to Tom Brusowski, I learned that at the time, the model of scientific research that was based on what is called the Pasteur quadrant, which is here. There was a background knowledge, and in fact, I did feel a little bit of this in Canada when I came back, that there was a dichotomy between pure and basic research and kind of applied research, that these two things were very different from each other. In fact, this Pasteur quadrant kind of divide research into things which are kind of fundamental and things which are kind of consideration for use. And this is how I believe the government at the time was kind of thinking about setting up programs which were kind of focused on pure and basic, and research, and programs which were in the applied part. In fact, the piece that they thought was great from the Pasteur quadrant is that they thought about the applied research was not opposed to basic research, but orthogonal to it. And for me, this really did not jive. This is not the way that I had learned kind of how kind of we go from ideas to kind of social impact and benefits. And maybe that was kind of my teaching or piece of that I learned at Los Alamos, which was outside the kind of pure science part of it. So I don't think that basic and applied research are either opposed or orthogonal. They are a piece of a puzzle going from one ideas to kind of ideas and concepts to lead to a social impact. So I had to kind of rationalize this and be able to explain it to people. So here's the cycle that they came up of what things got, of how kind of we go from how do we get ideas, how do we get concept, and how do we get to curiosity. There's a YouTube of a TEDx talk that I gave a few years ago that explained this a little bit more detail, but let me go through a little bit with some of these ideas. The way I see this happening is that it's really a cycle, and a cycle which starts with curiosity, this innate ability to look around and ask questions. Why we're curious, that's a puzzle to me and maybe to you also, although you came here today because of curiosity and wanting to, if you could learn something. Maybe curiosity is really something that came out of Darwin's principle. That is, by harnessing curiosity, we have been able to make our lives better and kind of improve our survival. So how would that work? So suppose that we start with curiosity. And if we have people like me who is interested in looking at phenomena around us, we are asking questions, and we're kind of, what we really want to do is to understand these phenomena. So there is a big arrow to bring us to some understanding. And what we mean by understanding is kind of building theories and the ability to predict what is going to happen. But once we have the ability of predict what is going to happen, then we have the potential for controlling these phenomena. And then once we have control of these phenomena, then we can turn them and make these phenomena, use them for a purpose. And that leads to the transformation to technology. And these technologies have sometimes, and hopefully more often than not, some potential for societal impact or benefit. And also as sometimes also going back to give us some tools so that we can start our curiosity again. If the development of the laser, for example, or some other technology, the computer certainly allow us to go and look at things that we were not able to do before because we didn't have the right instrument, the right tools, the right kind of setup to be able to do this. And so the cycle goes around and around. And this is what we've seen. And I can think of starting explaining from fire to steam to electromagnetism to the information revolution in terms of this cycle that we have here. And important to see in there that even if we have a lot of curiosity, a lot of things we can look at, then only a smaller amount we can understand, even a smaller amount we can control. And this is what I put in this kind of size of these arrows, it's kind of going down, you know. But the important point of all of this is that things are not separate in orthogonal parts, but really part of a chain that all hold together. And if you break one of them, then we don't end up with the social impact. So if we come back to trying to implement the cycles for quantum information in Canada, you have to realize that in 2001, Canada had a fantastic group of very curious researchers who were working hard to understand the implication of quantum mechanics for quantum information processing. But to make the next steps in a cycle, we needed to develop an experimental program. In fact, this has really puzzled me. I never understood why in the early 2000s, there were very few people in Canada doing experiments. There was a CFAR program on superconductivity, so it seems to have been easy to kind of make a jump and to kind of apply some of these ideas to quantum information. But there was no taker for experimental quantum information then. I believe that it's kind of related probably to the funding, because at the time I was kind of just moving out of the US. In the US, the funding system was such that it kind of encouraged kind of new things, and were kind of variety of programs that kind of make people kind of jumping from one area to the other, for example, for superconductivity to quantum information. And so this is what I kind of set up to do, and kind of the community had to kind of build up an experimental program. Although the C4 program was great and was a great way to build a Canadian community and kind of has had an impact until now, it didn't have the resources to build an experimental program that did not already exist. So I had to kind of turn around and think about how to make this happen. And the first step of this was at the Institute for Quantum Computing. So IQC focused at building an experimental program. That we did this by starting with the strength at the University of Waterloo in mathematics. And from this, we attracted light experimentalists. I hope you get the joke here. And it is hard to kind of feel how the joke is being taken in Zoom when kind of many camera is turning off and we cannot see the audience. So the joke is that these light experimentalists were people who were doing quantum optics. So the reason to start with these light experimentalists is that the infrastructure needed for them is not as expensive as if we compare them to solid state physics, where we need fabrication facilities and kind of dilution for refrigerators, etc. So with these light experimentalists, we then could start to turn to getting more kind of costly experiments, which will be needed for quantum computation. Fortunately, I went to a meeting organized by CFI, the Canadian Foundation for Innovation at the time. And one of the managers then told me that Canadians then, in the early 2000s, were too shy of applying for a large amount of money from CFI. So people had the mindset of applying for funding for CFI for their own research, but they didn't have ideas of kind of looking globally, a kind of large amount of a large experimental setup that would be provided for many people. So we put a proposal for 50 million, and that was great, as we had just started the plans to build a building at the Institute for Quantum Computing. And we could easily incorporate the idea of having a fabrication facility there. And so on this fabrication facility, I have to thank Vito Giudice for turning the idea and the cash from CFI and of the proposal to kind of reality and making this facility really a jewel for Canada. It is now a great tool for the Canadian community, but today more than 300 users, 6 universities are involved, and 15 companies. There are other kind of facilities that have come up since, and kind of in Sherbrooke, for example, there is a joint effort with IBM at Beaumont. There is great facilities at UBC with the quantum materials programs. And this is something that definitely a national strategy should be encouraging and kind of helping to be sure that they are accessible for all Canadians. But in 2006, there was not that many of these efforts. So we needed to try to attract experimentalists to Canada. So we looked for a program that would kind of focus on application of quantum information and complement what we had already, the CFAR program, which was really focused on fundamental research, and what IQC, which was really focused on getting a critical mass of researchers in one particular region. So there was a program called the Centers of Excellence. And so we kind of put a proposal for this, but unfortunately they required quite a substantial amount of cash from industry. And this is something that seems to be common in Canada, that kind of the programs often fund one part of academia, industry, or government, but kind of very few programs, or they are very hard to run, that brings all of this together. And something that we see in other countries, and I'll come back to this, in a few minutes. There was a real interest from industry at the time, but definitely not enough cash. But our request caught the attention of, again, Tom Bruszowski, who came to the rescue. And he guided us to what was called an innovation platform, which is a very special program that insert use very rarely, which we call QuantumWorks. So it was really a network that brought academia, industry, government together to develop quantum technologies in their application. It was really focused on developing the basic science, but also with kind of input for science, and so to see how we could kind of bring the industry on board in this quantum information revolution. QuantumWorks regrouped pretty much all the players in quantum information in Canada at the time. Its first focus was the science, but one with a view on the application. In fact, in Canada, it put Canada a step ahead of the other countries by organizing itself nationally. An example was the project led by initially Gregor Weiss and then taken up by Thomas Genevine on implementing QKD using satellites. That turned out into a collaboration with people in Toronto, in Calgary, in Waterloo, and then with ComDev, a company who builds satellites in Cambridge, Ontario, and which is now called, which has been acquired by Honeywell. And then the Communication Security Establishment in Ottawa and the Canadian Space Agency. So really kind of places where we needed to have collaborators from many parts to make this happen. But again, the funding was really focused only on paying for one part of this these groups. Importantly, it attempted to bring the program at QuantumWorks to bring academia, industry, and government by working on specific challenge. It was really a first step towards a national strategy. The challenge with this program was that it could only last for only 5 years. So in that sense, the program became a failure because after the 5 years, there was no other mechanism at the time that we could find to bring the whole community together. It just took a few years later, around 2015, 2016, when Ben Sussman and colleagues at NRC tried to again bring the community into the national strategy using QuantumWorks as an example. But it got challenged again because of apparently government employees cannot lobby for funding. So this did not work initially. But fortunately, there was a new program for the federal government called the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. And although it was not geared towards the field of quantum, the community did incredibly well. It was a great demonstration of the quality of the research and recognized the importance of quantum information and materials. Sherbrooke and UBC got in the first round and Waterloo in the second, and that created three main anchors for quantum information in Canada. This program allowed to build strong local communities in quantum. And Sherbrooke and Waterloo were focused on quantum information, UBC on quantum materials, and give the ability to compete internationally. In fact, this was probably the CIFREF maybe thought as a step towards building quantum ecosystems across Canada. The idea to me relates to this cycle of innovation I just mentioned. That things that going from ideas to concepts, to device, to materials, to societal impact, goes to a change of events that must be held together. They don't happen by themselves, just haphazardly. There needs to be an ecosystem that is a complex network of interacting systems that support such transfer of knowledge and development of technologies. I know a little bit about the one that has been created in Sherbrooke. There's another one that is becoming a nascent one in Calgary. And I've also heard about the Quantum BC and three attempts of putting more than one part of the science, but bringing communities together, communities that brings this cycle of innovation from the beginning to the end. We're still in the early stage of these ecosystems, but there's been some progress, definitely. Bring them. Maybe for you, these ecosystems seems to be a little bit abstract. So I'm going to give you an example of where I see this ideas of bringing all the pieces together leads to some impact. My colleagues Debbie Leung and Richard Cleve, in kind of around 2003, 4, and 5, 6, showed how it was possible to calculate the average fidelity of some process in quantum information and calculating this average fidelity by integrating over all the states can be arrays, so that instead of having the fidelity for a specific initial state in a process, average over all of them to give us an idea of how they would respond in a generic situation. And what they showed is that this integral, which would be very hard to calculate from an experimental point of view, they could be replaced by a discrete sum over what is called Clifford operation. This is what is called two designs. And this kind of opportunity was also later shown that the sum over this Clifford operation can be estimated efficiently. And that was work by kind of Joseph Emerson. In fact, Joseph understood that this can be used to characterize the noise of a quantum device. And he also realized that this averaging could be used to turn arbitrary noise into a depolarizing one, and therefore link with error correcting methods. So they would be a critical part to kind of build quantum information processor. So very nice piece of fundamental science. But Joseph realized that this can be the foundation of a startup that built softwares to characterize quantum computers. I remember at the time that I was a little bit skeptical, and it was very risky because there were very few quantum computer prototypes at the time. But Joseph really believed that this was an important piece. And by his leadership, he founded a company called Quantum Benchmark, which really thrived and kind of did incredibly well. In fact, the company was recently acquired by Keysight and did very much progress. So to come back to the piece about ecosystems, I've been thinking about this for a while. And although I'm not a specialist in building ecosystems kind of from a theoretical point of view, I've just had my hands in one of them and kind of trying to understand what are the different pieces. And here's our kind of different elements that I kind of with help of friends of colleagues put together. So to come back to here are the various elements of the quantum ecosystem in Waterloo. First, a strong innovation base, kind of people who think about in an entrepreneurial way, high levels of competitions, skills availability, kind of ACA students and postdoctoral fellow, strong infrastructure. I already mentioned a fabrication facility and kind of the infrastructure needed to kind of develop whatever piece of science that you are interested in. Strong networks, because to go from ideas again to social benefits, you need to have a bunch of links that kind of put together, and networks are really important. You need regional support and access to financing, which was happening when Quantum Valley investment. And the last part, which is here, engaged supplier and receiver, which kind of really means a receptive community. Maybe this is the part that has to be developed more and more. And this is not only for Waterloo, but for whole of Canada and the rest of the world, to have a really strong receptive community for the technology that comes out of the quantum world. But one thing that puzzled me was that in general in Canada, the funding only goes to one part, again, as I mentioned, of academia, industrial government, something which I believe is inhibiting the development of quantum information in Canada. An example that I will give of this is these NSERC Alliance programs. So I got involved with one with the UK recently, and I realized that the UK really understood that this idea that kind of there's a chain link and all the different parts. So there is this program with NSERC, Alliance program with the UK, where in the UK, they fund both the industry and the academia. And although the industry has to put some money forward, they also do get funding from the government. But this is very different in Canada, where we get support for the academic part, but no support for the industry there. And this is a challenge for quantum information science, where in Canada, we have many kind of small startup. And if you have been dealing with a small startup in your life, you know that cash is very precious. And so having the ability to give cash to a grant like NSERC Alliance is very challenging. And we don't have in Canada large companies like IBM or Google or Amazon who can be able to kind of give the cash on this. So this is something that is critical that we don't have, and we should kind of think about how to kind of form. I've heard that there is a DARPA program in Canada that will be created, or at least there's instructions to the minister for this to happen, and hopefully they will think this. In my experience, again, with the UK and Canada, and the UK and the US, this happens and is a common thing to happen. So I believe that if we want to compete internationally, an ecosystem approach is important. And certainly some of our international competitors are using this approach. And moreover, it might take the community to fund more robust funding cycles. And talking about funding cycles, here's a piece that I've seen recently. Again, my colleague Joe Emerson recently showed me this Gartner hype cycle. Gartner is a consultant company and makes prediction about a variety of technologies. On the horizontal axis, we have different stage of technology: innovation trigger, peak of inflated expectation, trough of the disillusion, slope of enlightenment, and plateau of productivity. And then you can see, if you look at very carefully and your screen has enough resolution at the bottom here, there's something called a flying autonomous vehicle. So indeed, we're very far. And if you look at the legend, this is more, at least they say more than 10 years ago. And you see on the other side, augmented reality, which is kind of on its way to the plateau of productivity. But if you look carefully, you'll see that they've put quantum computing here. And this was done in 2018, and they say 5 to 10 years to the plateau of the plateau of productivity, the peak of inflated expectation is at the top there. And this is what is usually called the quantum winter. So how are we going to go through this? And this is something that as a community we should think of, because there's a good chance that it will happen, or maybe it will not happen. So maybe if we believe Alan Greenspan was kind of an ex-US Federal Reserve chairman, who at some point before the dot-com bubble in the 2000s talked about the irrational exuberance of the markets, or we could say in quantum information of the VC capitals who invest these incredible amount of money for companies where products and kind of are still kind of quite far away. So if this exuberance will continue, might be kind of having the slope here a little smoother. Another possibility would be a real breakthrough in quantum information science. If we could, in 5 years from now, really have a quantum computer with 1,000 or a few thousand quantum bits, which are really reliable, that would really change the landscape. But another possibility also is the competition between the Chinese and the US government, who are thinking of quantum information as one of their future technology, and where they want to stake their claim of being the top in the world. And this competition has led to national programs in the US and in China to kind of develop science, and the funding from this is reverberating across the world. And so maybe this again will kind of smooth out this curve, which is in here. But this but both countries sees quantum technology as an area where they want to dominate. But this combination also comes with a challenge. And here in Canada, we are not immune to this competition. One morning in my office, some years ago, I got a phone call from somebody at CSIS and asked for a meeting. We met a few days later and was wondering what it would be about. The gentleman, I thought initially it would be about encryption or something like this. But the gentleman showed me a copy of the article that I pointed out here in Canada, and he pointed out that we are a little cavalier with whom we pick as collaborators. The discussion was very level-headed and was very focused on awareness and the implication of our choice of what we do. And this is something that we need to be informed here in Canada about if we want our discoveries and technologies to benefit Canada. Maybe this issue certainly caught my attention because I was at the US National Lab for some years, where issues like this were kind of a little bit more common. And on the other hand, I was also surprised by the lack of concern of some of my colleagues in Waterloo and across the country. And this issue is something which is related to a kind of ethics in our field. And this is something that we should promote in the future Quantum Days conference to come, something that we rarely discuss, but that we should really give some attention. On the good news, here is some area where I believe in Canada we've made progress on EDI. So first, I'd like to thank the organizers of the Quantum Days to pay attention to the AI. By looking at the roster, it's definitely obvious that the attention has been paid. And so this is something which I believe is really good for our community. And although we have made progress in having more diverse and equitable quantum information community, as our Prime Minister would say, better is possible. And so there are many places where I believe we can improve, from hiring from faculty to convincing more diverse applicants to grad school to more startups. And I believe we'll hear more about EDI in a panel later today at this conference. So that leads me to kind of slowly getting to the end of my remarks and talking a little bit about the history of the national strategy. As I mentioned, some ideas of putting a national strategy kind of came from NRC, and Ben Sussman, thank you for your effort around 2015, 2016, although I assume it was pretty challenging and kind of made me learn that this had to be picked up by other people, as the government apparently cannot kind of lobby to fund themselves. But NRC asked a few people in the community, the VP research of the 6 leading Canadian universities in quantum research, help with Robert Dunlop, which was from, the ministry in Canada that deals with kind of research in quantum information. And they started a working group to put a proposal and a strategy together around 2017 and 2018. Proposal was submitted to the federal government in the fall 2019 and the winter 2020. We submitted it in 2020, 2021, as kind of the budget in winter 2020 was refocused on the pandemic, one of these accident of parcours, as they say, to kind of unroll and do kind of different things. So it was resubmitted in the winter 2021, and in spring 2021, about a year from that, a year ago, the federal budget allocated funding for the strategy. In fact, I think having a national strategy is something which is important, and to have a logical disbursement of the resources and kind of putting focuses and kind of on different areas of research and kind of putting priorities is important. The strategy makes the assumption that the quantum field will grow using existing federal programs supervised by a secretariat. And I've been always kind of a little doubtful about this. Can this really work? I must admit that I was and still a skeptic of this approach. Just the budget has been announced a year ago, and a small part of the little bit consultation came in, and we're kind of 1 year on of this program. For example, although the funding is generous, once we think the size of the community and what was requested, it is clear that some priorities we'll have to put forward. And how is this going to work? How does the Secretariat will ensure that the various programs do indeed take the National Quantum Strategy Fund and allocate it to quantum research? Who's going to decide what quantum research really is? Will the Secretariat tap programs so that they are appropriate to the quantum field? How will kind of the coordination with various agencies work? I mentioned the various quantum ecosystem a little bit earlier on. It is clear that they are in different stages of their evolution, and their needs are very different. In fact, the national strategy think about one quantum ecosystem. But if you really look at how things are working, there's kind of a family or kind of a community of them, and they are kind of different stages in the area. I really just do not understand how a secretariat will, a very kind of simple, small secretariat will be able to have the capacity to make this assessment, but I hope it can. I also believe that it's important to have more input in the science and industry in the strategy. Maybe this could be something to be taken up at this conference to sum up what are the perceived needs and communicate them to the ministry. So I'm kind of getting toward the end, so some of the lessons learned. So I think that it is clear that the community in Canada and many people in the research community, in academia, in government, and in industry that the potential of quantum information in materials is tremendous, but there are many pitfalls on the road to social benefits. And if we are not taking care of these pitfalls, then the effort might well kind of scramble. I always get remembered of a comment again of Tom Brusowski, who said that Canada never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And although this might seem kind of a little bit defeatist in some ways, to me, it was kind of a call to action to make sure that this is not the case. And I would love to prove Tom wrong in the field of quantum information science. I believe that one way of doing this is to build ecosystem and kind of to make our endeavor more robust. Important to have a long-term vision to attract researchers. Governance is something which is important, which is something that I've learned. As a scientist, I always thought that governance is something that other people do, but good governance is something which is really helpful in reaching goals and vision that a strategy would have. Engaging with the funders to understand their viewpoints, as this is really important. Asking things which kind of really does not fit with the viewpoint of the funders is a challenge, as anybody who has submitted large proposals to the federal government or to VC capital organization will know very quickly. And also it's important to tell our stories. A final point that I would like to mention is the development of leaders. That is incredibly important and is something that we don't always think when things are going kind of on the way, but the programs in quantum information is a multi-generation one, and kind of developing the new generation of leaders is something that we should put attention on. Looking to the future, there's much work to be done. Worldwide competition has increased dramatically for both talent and funding. Advancements in science and commercializable technologies will become imperative. To continue our track record of success, Canada will need to be focused to maintain our world-class status and ensure that it is seen as a leader in quantum research. We need the help, in fact, of all of you. It is our commitment to excellence that brings government, funders, and industry partners here seeking new opportunities. I'd like to finish by thanking many people who have taught me many, many things. And I do apologize for the people that I miss in there. But for the last 20 years, I've learned so much about how quantum information works, to kind of how to turn the ideas of quantum information works to potential societal benefits. So thank you for all of them. Some of them kind of helped me kind of many years ago. Some of them kind of answered my emails that I've sent recently, and definitely members of kind of a Quantum Works IQC CFAR program kind of have helped me kind of putting my thoughts together. So I'd like to finish with some thoughts and questions. And a basic one, it is something which we do not really kind of say in so many kind of scientific conferences, but do we agree that we are doing is ultimately for social benefits? And if we do, what is the best way to arrive there? And science plays a critical role of this, but there needs to be more than only science in there. Is this the ecosystem approach the most promising one? And if not, what else do we have to propose? If yes, how do we weigh all its components? And how do we fund them so that kind of the ecosystem works? But at the same time, we know that there are finite number of resources. So how do we kind of do this in order to reach societal benefits? For example, I believe that in Canada, we should strengthen right now the number of engineers and entrepreneurs in the field of quantum. How do we incorporate them in a Canadian national strategy? What can we learn from, for example, the Canadian AI strategy, which kind of started a few years ago? And all this, I will stop here and thank you for having listened to me during that time.
Thank you very much for this presentation, very full of information and lots of food for thought. Questions are coming in. So for those who are just arriving or coming a little bit late, we're taking questions on the Whova app, and please press ask a question to start a new thread with your question, and you can also upvote questions as they're coming in. To get us started, there is a question here. It's about the quantum ecosystem, or ecosystems is basically the question. So the impression here is that we talked about multiple ecosystems with an S, which is a regional model. Is there a case to be made to have a pan-Canadian association for the larger stakeholder community?
Absolutely. We can maybe have an one ecosystem of ecosystems. Although I must admit that I heard in the national strategy, there was this idea there was one quantum ecosystem in Canada. And certainly, I hope that this will happen one day. But if I look back in 2 years ago, the single quantum ecosystem in Canada, I did not see it. So there are efforts now to put things together. I believe that at the end, there are parts which, if we look at these different ecosystems by themselves, they might have different needs and they have different focus. And so we cannot kind of use the same approach necessarily to all of them. They are in different stage of evolution. So I think there needs to be a way of thinking about them separately and see what are their needs, and also to look at places where they can intersect. So one place which is pretty obvious where they can intersect is in the incredible kind of fabrication facilities that we have across Canada. So obviously we cannot have one at every universities who kind of implement things for quantum information science and focus there. So there has to be collaboration between different regions together. And I think that would be something that would be very good for a national strategy, to be sure that the infrastructure, the lab infrastructure that we have can be shared amongst all Canadians. And particularly that most of them are being funded by the Canadian government.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. While other questions are coming in, let me ask you one from my side. You talked about the importance of creating a vision, mission, and goals. Could you walk me through that process? It sounded like a very important one. And what did you learn in that process?
So I don't know there is one process to make this happen. And in the organization that I have, it has happened in very different ways. Sometimes you have one leader who has a very different ideas of what can happen and kind of bring that vision. That's what typically happens in startup companies, for example, that kind of somebody has a vision of having a particular device or software or whatever application that they have, and kind of they think about this as a piece that kind of be useful for a social benefit, and then it goes from there. There are other things which are different. I would say a Quantum Works or a CFAR program, things are different, where you have a community of people. There, kind of, I think that the first thing is to realize that it is important to have a vision, a mission, and goals. So, and there, the experience that I've had is having a set of meetings and a set of discussion. This does not happen. And I will admit that to me, talking about vision and mission and goals, I find it very hard. It is not something that flows naturally, that kind of I whip around and put together, and I have to go back and look at them again. And on this, I'd like to thank the board of the Institute for Quantum Computing, who really kind of push certainly IQC of thinking about this seriously, and kind of, and something which is useful to represent exactly what that community is doing. So I am a person who's fundamentally very, very curious, and I easily get distracted by the different opportunity that my curiosity drives me to. And without having goals, which are kind of clear and precise, then I get kind of distributed on all these possibilities. So I think the importance of having goals and goals which are reachable are something which are absolutely critical. Exactly how you reach them comes from talking to the community, talking to the stakeholders also, not only the community, but the people who will take the result of your research. Ask them kind of what is important for them, and then incorporate this in the process of putting a mission and putting goals together. So a large of community effort, many meetings, conversation, some formals, some informals. And suddenly as some of the ideas come together, suddenly community clicks or kind of gels on some ideas and realize, yes, this is really the right way of putting together. So I've never met somebody who kind of out of the blue in one of the program came up with kind of a solution, but with lots of discussions, then suddenly pieces started to get together.
Great. Let me see. Thanks for your answer. So another question coming from the audience. Lots of institutes right now are facing budget cuts. What advice do you give to PhD students about the future of quantum computing in Canada and worrying about the future when it comes to research funding, startup funding, etc.? This actually speaks to one of the conversations we had in the panel yesterday, which was like the students are having a hard time seeing that they have a future and what's their career path. And so that makes it difficult to commit to be in this area.
So if I look at the difference between now and 20 years ago, the funding for quantum innovation is very different, and definitely there is a national strategy. There is funding. There's 350 million that the federal government has committed to spend. Now, we haven't seen this money coming out yet. It will be soon, so we all have to be a little bit patient. Although I would say we should, to add to our patience, we should add a little push also. I think things are a little slower than what I would have expected, and things should ramp up, and there should be funding for a variety of institutes. But also, it is important not only to have an institute, but as I mentioned earlier on, it's important to have a vision of where we want to go and to kind of focus this national strategy on the places which are important. And right now, it is not totally clear how the decisions are being made on this national strategy. There was a consultation, but exactly how this consultation was distilled. And I heard that kind of finally the consultation came out a few days ago. But I think we need more than this. I think we need to be a little bit more active. And I would suggest, as I mentioned a little bit before, that Quantum Days come with some recommendation for the national strategy. So this is our second year of Quantum Days. Last year, we did not have a budget yet or a national strategy which was funded. So the reason of the first Quantum Days was to show that there was a very strong community and that we were there and we demonstrate to government that there was a need for this national strategy. This year is a little bit different. We're funded and we're kind of a little bit in a transition. And I believe that as we move forward, Quantum Days should have some times where there's some thoughts about kind of what are the priorities of the community and make them clear. And I don't think that the priorities of the communities are that clear at present.
Thanks a lot, Raymond Laflamme. We will encourage people to continue the discussions on the Whova app, so people can actually you can answer and discuss if that's possible. Raymond, after your presentation, there's still some few questions outstanding. Thanks a lot for the audience participation, and I will now introduce the next speaker. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anne.
We now turn to the second speaker in the session, Dr. Krista Savory. Dr. Krista Savory is a distinguished engineer and VP of quantum software at Microsoft. She's dedicated to realizing commercial scale quantum computing to solve today's unsolvable problems and to empowering people and organizations around the world with quantum computing through Azure Quantum, the most diverse cloud platform for quantum computing. She is an AAAS fellow and was named one of the 39 most powerful women engineers by Business Insider in 2018. She serves on the Advanced Scientific Computing Advisory Committee of the Department of Energy, the ISAT Committee of DARPA, and is a Kavli Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences. She received the ACM Best of 2013 Notable Article Award and was a member of the winning team for the Yahoo Learning to Rank Challenge in 2010. Dr. Savory has authored over 70 papers and has filed over 30 patents. It's really exciting to have you here today to tell us about accelerating the cloud with quantum. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Anne. Are the slides displaying okay?
The slides are displaying okay.
Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending where you're logged in from. Thank you so much for the invitation to share with you this morning on how we're accelerating and working to accelerate the cloud with quantum computing. So I lead our quantum software and systems engineering work at Microsoft, where we're working to build out an ecosystem that will empower people and organizations around the world with quantum computing. Really excited to be here and share some of the learnings we've had over the 15 years we've been working in this space, and also look at where we're headed, right? What should we be thinking about? What are the questions we should be asking? And how can access to quantum computing, whether it's programming, development, hardware, right? How can that access through the cloud help accelerate us towards that full promise of quantum and that quantum future? So let's dive in. Well, let me advance my slide. There we go. Well, I think it's no surprise that quantum computing is all over the media, all over the press, right? I grabbed some of the headlines just from this week, this week's in the news, right? When I searched for quantum computing in the news, here are 3 headlines that came up. And I think we all recognize it's in the news, and not every headline is exactly correct, right? So part of what I want to achieve today is starting to ground us a bit more in what is possible with quantum computing, right? What should we be focused on in terms of accelerating problems and solutions, right? So, more and more companies, more and more startups, quantum startups are going public. Just this week, another one is announced. Great to see this question about how big does your quantum computer really need to be, right? That's something I want to talk about today. What size quantum computer do we need? What size quantum computer do we need to solve important, valuable societal problems, right? And will they really threaten everything? Or maybe in the more positive, are they going to solve everything, right? Which problems can they actually solve, right? Will they actually solve? And what size, right? So I think these are great headlines to actually fuel and drive some of our research, development, and innovation. So, as we think about that, let's dive in, right? Quantum practicality. We really want to use the quantum computer to solve things that are going to be useful, right? Useful for a scientific question, to solve and answer a scientific question, useful for an industry question, right? Where we're going to get a solution that's faster or better than something we could get from any known classical algorithm on the best possible classical computer, right? The best possible scenario on the classical side. And the thing is for it to be practical, and I've definitely learned this in working at Microsoft, right? For it to be practical, that solution really needs to come within a matter of weeks, right? Waiting a year for the solution, even waiting a few months for the solution, that's not practical for industrial and scientific progress. And in terms of waiting for that solution, when we deploy solutions at Microsoft across our products, across what we're working on, typically the longest runtime we have is about a month, right? We might train a machine learning model for a month. But training it for several months, we tend not to choose that solution. So I think in the quantum case, when we think about quantum practicality, we want to have a similar scenario, right? Practicality should come with it being useful for a problem that we care about, right? In science or industry. It should produce a solution that's faster or better than any known classical solution, and it should do so within a few weeks. So that crossover point, when we look at the problem size versus the time to solution, right? The crossover between the set of classical solutions and the quantum solutions needs to be in a matter of a few weeks. So when we take this definition of quantum practicality, right, or quantum advantage, if you will, quantum, as we look through the set of problems we want to solve on a quantum computer, then which ones still hold true? Which ones are quantum practical? So again, like we've heard, some form, some flavor of all of these phrases, right? Quantum computers will solve everything. Quantum computers will solve big data problems, right? For machine learning or AI. Quantum computers are faster because they can do everything at the same time, right? I mean, is this correct, right? We can dive in and see. And there's many, many problems, right? Many great quantum algorithms that have been invented and developed over the years. Stephen Jordan in our team has maintained for some time now the quantum algorithm zoo. So if you haven't checked out the quantum algorithm zoo, I encourage you to check that out. It really lists, many of the quantum algorithms that have been developed and have quantum speedups. And of course, these speedups are typically asymptotic speedups, right? And they're formulated in an oracle manner or a query-based model. And so there's a whole maze of proposed applications here. And part of our task is to ask, like, which of these are really going to be quantum practical, right? They might have an asymptotic speedup, but which ones, when we map it to architectures, to map it to the types of quantum computing device designs we're looking at and architectures, which ones will sustain that advantage, right? Which ones will sustain a runtime that's truly faster than the best classical, or a solution that's truly more accurate, right? Because an asymptotic speedup doesn't guarantee that within a 2-week runtime, for example, if we only let the quantum computer run for 2 weeks or a month, it doesn't guarantee that for a given problem size, we will see that performance advantage. So as we look over these, right, our goal is to take all of these amazing problems or algorithms and see which ones will give that quantum advantage, that practical quantum advantage that we want to see from a quantum computer. And then given those workloads, right, given the ones that make it through that filter, then let's design our architecture, right? Let's co-develop a system to enable that class of workloads. So we can start to dig in and we can ask, okay, which of these applications will outperform a classical chip? Let's assume today's classical chip, and let's have that be, say, an NVIDIA A100 GPU. Let's say it has 54 billion transistors and less than a nanosecond cycle time. And let's give the quantum computer some advantage here, right? Let's not take today's quantum computer, but let's take a version of tomorrow's quantum computer where it has all-to-all connectivity, which is optimistic, right? Typically, the devices we're looking at have more of a nearest neighbor type of grid or lattice in terms of the architecture, the underlying architecture, or maybe clusters of nodes of qubits that can communicate all-to-all, but they can't communicate all-to-all across all qubits in the system. So let's assume all-to-all, right? That's going to give some advantage to the quantum computer. Let's assume we have 10,000 logical qubits, right? These are qubits that would operate at that algorithm level. So they're very robust, they're error corrected, they're fault tolerant, right? We have a fault tolerant machine here. Let's assume 10,000 of those. And let's assume we have a 10 microseconds logical cycle time. And so that's that operation speed at the logical level, at the algorithm level. So we take these two chips, right, these two versions of machines, and let's see which quantum applications will continue to retain that advantage when we compare the quantum versus the classical. So quantum computers, right, the whole point of that asymptotic speedup is that they will require fewer operations, right? And so you might see a quadratic speedup, so quadratically fewer operations, or you might see an exponential speedup, so you have exponentially fewer operations. But when we dig in, right, to that quantum computer and how it will operate and the cost of operating the quantum machine, right, reading, operation speeds, these are all orders of magnitude slower than the classical chip, right? So even though we have fewer, they can take orders of magnitude longer, right, for each one. So that advantage can, is dramatically reduced. So let's take some comparisons, right? A logic operation, if we take a logic operation, let's think of that like a Toffoli operation or a AND or an OR or NOT gate, right? A simple logic operation, again, operating at the logical level, right, at the fault tolerant level here. On a classical chip that operates, on a GPU at about 5 petaops a second. And on this, this tomorrow quantum machine, right, it's about 2 megaops per second. So several orders of magnitude slower to perform one, say, Toffoli operation or Boolean style logic operation at the logical level, at the fault tolerant level. What about floating point operations, right? 16-bit floating point operations on a quantum computer, this would take maybe several hundred Toffoli operations, okay? So several hundred logic operations in a floating point operation. And we compare these, well, again, it's several order of magnitude gap here, right? In like several hundred teraops per second on a classical GPU, 7 kiloops a second on the quantum computer. Right. So again, the quantum computer is slower. And similarly for reading in information, as we read data, to read data on a quantum computer, you're looking at operating at about a gigabit per second. Whereas with the classical chip, classically, we can read several orders of magnitude faster at around 10,000 gigabits per second. Okay, so we have quite a bit of a range here in terms of orders of magnitude that we're going to have to have to make sure we account for when we look at these advantages of a quantum solution. So what, as we look at these numbers, what you start to understand is that quadratic speedups aren't enough, right? Going from n operations on our quantum with our quantum solution, with our classical solution, our classical algorithm, to square root of n operations or oracle calls on the quantum algorithm, for the quantum algorithm, that's not going to give us enough of a speed up given the order of magnitude difference in operation speeds and read speeds. Right, so just to bring this to life a little further, right, let's consider the operations we might be doing and then looking at the crossover time, the operations in those oracles. If we're just comparing against a floating point operation there in the oracle and we look at, try to find a problem size where that crossover, where it starts to cross over, it doesn't cross over till 4 months. The crossover time for 1,000 floating point operations, that comes out at 3 centuries, right? Protein folding, you're looking at the age of the universe. It's not going to be a practical problem for a quantum computer to go solve. 1,000 logical operations, it's about 5 months. And a hard optimization problem is more like a decade. Right, so these problems that have quadratic speedups on a quantum computer really aren't going to end up being practical because they're not going to be solvable. The solution, the runtime to that solution is just too long on a quantum computer due to the speeds of the operations and the reading of data. So taking that into account, when can we see a practical crossover time, right? So for which problems will we have a practical crossover time? Well, it turns out super quadratic speedup is the answer, right? If we have super quadratic speedup from our quantum algorithm, our quantum solution, well, then we start to see practical crossover times. So here you can see this come to life. If we consider an oracle where, let's say we have an oracle call with the following operations in it. How many operations could be in that oracle such that we have a crossover time of about 2 weeks? Well, it turns out for a logic operation at a quadratic speedup, if we want a reasonable 2-week crossover time, we can only afford 71 logic operations in that quantum oracle. But if we have a cubic speedup, you start to see that separation really start to bring that advantage to the quantum solution, right? With a cubic speedup, you have more like 13 million logic operations that can fit in a given oracle call. On floating point operations, right, we can't even afford 1 if we only have a quadratic speedup, but we can afford 21,000 of those in our oracle if we have a cubic speedup. So, getting just beyond that quadratic speedup to a cubic speedup, a quartic speedup, right? As we gain a super quadratic speedup for our quantum algorithm, we start to see that practical advantage. And so we need to look for quantum algorithms where we have a super quadratic speedup. Those are the ones that we will want to, really pull through and implement on our quantum machines. So which problems do retain these types of speedups, right? I mentioned that for practicality, right, quantum practicality and quantum advantage, we really want to look at scientific problems, industrial problems that where we can see this advantage. And the simplest practical quantum advantage we have, or that we know about today, is in simulating the dynamics of a simple, classically intractable quantum magnet. So here you can take the transverse Ising field model, take a lattice that's 10 by 10. Let's say we want a simulation, we want to do a simulation time of 10, a time period of 10. And to do this 10 by 10 lattice with a 10-step simulation time, we need about 100 qubits. And these operations, you're going to need around, tens of thousands, probably around 100,000 gate operations. And so to perform this problem, we're going to need an error rate that's less than 10 to the minus 6, more likely less than 10 to the minus 7. And this should give us the simplest practical quantum advantage. Doing this problem with this specification is outside the range of our classical solutions today. So this would be, again, a practical quantum advantage running within a matter of a few weeks. And right now, it's several orders of magnitude beyond the capabilities of our current noisy small quantum machines. So we still have further to go. It doesn't necessarily have to have a logical qubit, but we do need an error rate that's going to be less than around 10 to the minus 6 to 10 to the minus 7. So if you have a qubit that's has operations of that quality, then this problem could be one you shoot for. But that's unlikely. So likely these 100 qubits need to be fault tolerant with an error rate, achieving an error rate under error correction with about 10 to the minus 6 or 10 to the minus 7 with using an error correcting code. So this is a nice, nice target for a simple practical quantum advantage. And one of the requiring, this is probably the problem that requires the smallest quantum machine that we know of today. And you can see that machine, we still have a little ways to go to build a machine that can run this problem. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, right, as we look, oh, sorry about that. I think there's a animation. On the other end of the spectrum, we have larger, which problems we want to run for more of that industrial and scientific impact. And there we need a larger quantum machine. So the previous problem, 10 to the minus 7 error rate, around 100 qubits with that type of fidelity or error rate. Here, for the problems we want to solve in chemistry, right, in material science, there it's really more of a machine that has more than 1 million physical qubits, right? Because we need such a substantial improvement in error rate, and the number of operations required is larger. So we're looking at a machine, right, to really have that leadership class machine, right, solving some of the most important problems. We need more than 1 million physical qubits. And I'll try to speak to this slide as it advances here. In terms of which problems those are going to be, it's in chemistry and materials science, where we really want to target getting to the point of predictive computational design. And that predictive computational design means that we're able to design, right, using our computing power, which here is going to be hybrid, right? It's going to be a mix. The problems we're going to solve here and the quantum algorithms we bring forward are hybrid. Quantum algorithms are hybrid algorithms, right? They have a classical compute component and they have quantum compute components, right? And so when we think about solving problems in chemistry and materials science that are really going to change things in society for the better, right? Things like helping with clean water, right? How are we going to help remove, for example, pollutants or VOCs on water's surface, right? We need to be able to solve problems in catalysis, in photovoltaics, and quantum computers can help there, right? What's exciting is with quantum computers, we can start to see that predictive computational design is going to be possible, that we'll be able to understand electronic energies more accurately with a quantum computer in that loop, right? In with a classical computer, right? running HPC type of code, right? We call the quantum computer to run a calculation, right? A more accurate energy calculation, for example, among reaction rates for catalysis. And this can help us understand how to find a better catalyst for problems in clean combustion, right? How can we boost fuel efficiency and remove pollutants from the air, right? As we seek a better combustion mechanism. In the case of clean energy, right? How can we look at better photoactivation processes, right? How can we look at more efficient carbon fixation, solar energy conversion, right? All of this requires understanding these energies at high accuracy and to larger scale. And it's outside the realm, outside the range of our classical compute capabilities. We really need that quantum computer in the loop that can give us those energies at more accuracy, right? Higher accuracy. In the case of clean water, as I mentioned, we want to find mechanisms to kill bacteria more efficiently than we have today, or remove these pollutants, like I mentioned with VOCs on the water surface. Catalysis style problems help us there. And so we need to identify those catalysts, and quantum computers will help us do that. And in energy efficiency, we want to better identify which materials will have high temperature superconductors, or sorry, which materials will enable high temperature superconductivity. And that can help us then, of course, create cleaner better energy solutions, mechanisms to transport energy more losslessly and so forth. But all of those problems, right, even if that's the only set of problems we ever solve with a quantum computer, that still changes absolutely everything, right? These problems are the types of problems we need to go after because they are outside the classical realm right now, and really promise better solutions for our society, right? So we want to go after those problems, and those problems indeed start with a quantum machine that has at least 1 million physical qubits. So then we can ask, how do we get there? Right? We need a quantum machine that requires, we need a quantum machine that has 1 million physical qubits and beyond to solve these types of problems. The challenge there is to get to that point, right? We need to scale up. And we need to scale up not only the number of qubits in the system, right? But we have to interact with those qubits, right? We have to be able to control them. We have to be able to read them out. We then have to be able to talk to those qubits, right? How do we control and read out the qubits? Well, we have to program them. So we have to be able to scale up not only the quantum plane, right? The number of qubits there, the device design, but also the control and read out, all of the electronics, right? All of the ways we connect to those qubits and communicate with those qubits. And then on top of that, we have to control how do we tell the qubits what to do, right? How do we ask them to run the following computation? Well, that requires a whole software stack, right? Complete software stack. How do we keep the errors? We have to scale up the way we do error correction and decoding. We have to scale up the software stack, the programming languages that enable us to write these solutions down and then communicate with the quantum machine. And so in all layers of this quantum system, the complete stack has to be able to scale to the 1 million physical qubit realm and beyond. And that leaves open a really great set of challenges for all of us to work on, right? And this is where we see so much investment and excitement, pouring into the quantum community right now, because there's a lot to go do to really unlock the full promise of a quantum computer. So where are we today, right? When we think about trying to run these applications, even the smaller, magnet problem I mentioned, right, is still orders of magnitude beyond the systems we have today. Here we have the qubit error rate, plotted versus the number of qubits, for example, in the machine. And this is just a rough sketch, so don't take these numbers, too precisely, but you get the point, right? In the bottom right, that's roughly where systems are today, right? Maybe they have 100 qubits, let's say up to 100 qubits. In some cases, maybe 1,000 or more qubits, but as we build those, those tend to be really noisy. So maybe more to the right in this graph. But in the systems, roughly maybe you have 100 qubits in systems today, or tens of qubits in systems today, depending on the underlying device technology. And, the error rates vary, right? Maybe 1 9, 2 9, sometimes 3 9s for different operations in those systems. So that gray area roughly covers systems we have today. And where do we need to get to, right? For that quantum, for that simple, classically intractable magnet problem I mentioned, right? Or beyond that, right? For the case of doing more catalysis style problems, where do we need to get to? Well, we need 100 logical qubits for those problems. And those logical qubits have to have error rates that range from 10 to the -7 over to 10 to the -15. So they have to be very, very accurate. And so we need to be able to bring these two curves together. This blue curve represents roughly how many qubits we would need for 100 error-corrected logical qubits at these different error rates. And in fact, we maybe need even more than what's plotted there. So we need to be able to bring these two curves, roughly together, right? If we can lower the number of logical qubits we need for an algorithm, right? So we can push down, basically optimize our software stack, optimize our quantum algorithms, right? To reduce the resource needs of the quantum machine. And we can work to improve the error rates of the systems we have, develop different device designs so that the underlying physical error rate of those machines is better, of those qubits is better, for example, right? We need to push from both ends of the stack, right? We need to push up from the hardware design, the device design, the electronics design, and we need to push down from the quantum algorithm design and bring these together. So there are tasks here, right? Challenges here, opportunities here for the algorithms, the applications, the developers, the mathematicians, right? On one end, and then engineers, physicists, right? Device designers, right? Materials. Folks working in the materials domain, from both sides, we need to be pushing and working to improve so that we can get to that point where we have a 1 million physical qubit system running a really valuable and practical problem. So at Microsoft, we've taken an approach. So let's start from the bottom up here on the device side. We've taken an interesting and we find very scalable approach at Microsoft to build this quantum machine. And as we look to identify, what approach should we take, we identified 3 parameters or 3 characteristics, you might say, of a quantum machine that's critical, right? Absolutely key for reaching 1 million physical qubits and beyond. So really, to get to the point where we have quantum practicality and we're running one of these algorithms I mentioned, this quantum machine needs the right size, it needs the right speed, and it needs the right reliability. You saw earlier how critical speed can be, right? A quantum computer is slower. And we gave some advantage to the quantum computer in that comparison. Now imagine, as we look at architectures and different machine designs, right? That speed in some systems is even slower. And every additional cost, right, in terms of speed there, right, extends out that crossover time. It extends out the time to solution on your quantum machine, right? And so the faster we can make our quantum machine, the better in terms of bringing that crossover time in and setting it up for a better quantum advantage opportunity. The size, right? The size also matters. When we look, right, in that comparison, we assumed all-to-all connectivity. But size matters here because, right, if you can fit all of those qubits on a single design, right, you don't have long distance connectivity required, long distance communication. And in many, many architectures, right, of quantum machines, right, if you have to communicate over longer distances, say between chips, between nodes, right, however you want to describe your system, you have pools maybe of qubits, right, nodes of qubits, and you have to communicate between those nodes. That tends to be a very noisy operation. You might say that's your constraining operation, right, your most noisy operation in your system. And so let's reduce that, right? So size matters in that if you can fit all of the qubits needed for your algorithm, for your computation on a single module, maybe it's a single wafer, a single node, right? Whatever it may be for your architecture, the better you are positioned for reaching that 1 million physical qubit and beyond scaling. And then in terms of that size, you need to be in this really, this sweet spot of size as well, right? It needs to be small enough that you can put all of those qubits, all million of those qubits, right, onto a single module. But it also needs to be big enough that you can fit all of the readout and control electronics, right? So if the qubit design is too small, if the device design is too constraining, too small, then you can't fit the control electronics and the readout necessary, right, to operate and communicate and operate the qubits, right? So there is a sweet spot in terms of size, small enough to get everything on a single module, but big enough to get all the electronics in there that you need to communicate with the device. And then finally, there's reliability, right? If we want to achieve this, these algorithms and have, not too many physical qubits, not too many more beyond the million to do so. Well, then we need good reliability in the device, right? We need to achieve a logical error rate of, say, 10 to the minus 12 or better for these problems, 10 to the minus 7 in the case of that magnet problem. But really, we want to get to that 10 to the minus 12 and beyond in terms of the logical error rate. So that reliability matters at the logical level. And then at the physical error rate level, then we're going to need low physical error rates to get there if we want to have low cost to get there, right? So every time that physical error rate, as you saw in that curve, right, you need more qubits if your physical error rate is worse. So we want to find a system that has a nice low physical error rate and delivers the right gate speed and is small enough but big enough, right, for the single module design and control and readout electronics. And once we looked across many architectures, right, many different device designs, machine designs, right, what we've landed on is the machine, right, the design, the type of qubit and machine design that can fit these three characteristics is topological. And so we've been investing in what's called topological qubits, and these qubits promise a better physical error rate, right, at that physical level, which in turn means we have less overhead as we build up a system to solve the types of problems we saw earlier. It also has the right size in terms of that single module design, right? You can fit 1 million of these qubits on a single module, and it has the right size in terms of the electronics. What I mentioned earlier around control, right? I mentioned that we have to scale not only the qubit design and the quantum plane, but we also have to extend how we control and read out from that plane. And so many of the physical qubit designs, the device designs out there require very cold temperatures to remain more noise free. And so these qubits often run at just above absolute zero, right? They're running at around 100 millikelvin temperature, and we have to be able to control them. And so here's a picture of the standard wiring. So these qubits often sit, many of the qubit designs sit in a dilution refrigerator, and you have to be able to wire up the qubits, right? You have to be able to communicate those with the qubits. And so you have to have signals, right? You have to be able to send signals to those qubits to control them. And this is a picture of a standard control wiring or control setup where you have, say, 100, maybe 100 qubits in that system. So this setup can control roughly 100 qubits. And what you can immediately see, right, is this looks a bit like a bird's nest, right? It's a bird's nest of wires. We need to get to 1 million physical qubits. Just replicating this, right, and using this mode, this type of control where you have roughly 300 coax cables here, and it can control up to around 100 qubits, right? This is not going to be scalable to 1 million physical qubits and beyond. So we have to rethink control. We have to rethink not only the device design, the qubit design, but also the control and readout design, and then the complete stack, the complete software stack design. And so we've done just that. Over the last several years, we've been investing in how do we scale control, right? Not only how do we scale the qubit design, And there we've looked at the topological qubit, invested in bringing the topological qubit forward, but also how do we scale that control design? And what we've landed on is we've developed a type of cryogenic control. And so here you're going from, these 300 wires that are connected to a room full of racks, right, and equipment, and it sends signals down to the qubits using those wires. We've mapped to just 3 wires, right? We've taken that room full of racks and we put it onto the chip. Right, so all of that compute that was in the room connected up to those wires, we put it onto the chip. And we've developed a custom silicon here. We have cryogenic CMOS. It's running at colder temperatures than I think even NASA has tried in terms of CMOS, running a CMOS chip in a cold environment. So we have we have a custom silicon running at 100 millikelvin. We have a more cryogenic compute stack running at, say, like around 2 Kelvin, where you get a lot more heat, thermal. You have a better thermal load there, so you have a lot more compute you can do at 2 Kelvin. So we've developed this kind of split chip where we have some of it running at 100 millikelvin, some running at 2 Kelvin. And this control unit, now we can go from that 300 wire scenario down to around three wires with this custom silicon cryogenic CMOS right there controlling our qubits. And this system can control around 50,000 qubits. So this type of system will enable us to scale up to that million physical qubit realm that we need to get to. So again, looking at this curve, right? What we just talked about is a way we can push that device design, the architecture, the quantum machine design, to a more scalable scenario. But we also can pull on how we approach our quantum algorithms, right? Pull down the resources required, the number of qubits, the number of operations of our algorithms to also work towards, really demonstrating practical quantum advantage. So in that realm, we can go back to, for example, the problem we looked at earlier of chemistry and materials, and in particular catalysis, right? And here, a quantum computer is going to be a part of a very hybrid solution, right? We're going to have a hybrid, we have hybrid algorithms here, right? They're quantum and classical. So we have a classical compute going on that calls in, right? A quantum computer is an accelerator, right? We call the quantum computer for a special evaluation or a special function evaluation, right? And then we get that solution, we pipe it back through some classical loop, right? Classical compute, and then we call the quantum computer again. So there's very much a feedback loop between the classical processing and the quantum call. And here, this is an example of how you do this for an accurate prediction of, say, an industrial metric for catalysis, right? Where you're going to explore on the classical computer the catalyst, the structures, the potential structures for that catalyst. You're going to modify those structures, understand the reaction pathways, and then you're going to ask the quantum computer to obtain an accurate energy calculation, for example. And you're going to use the quantum computer to do that, right? Where the classical computer gives you the parameters of that Hamiltonian, a trial state, and then you obtain that accurate energy using the quantum computer, and then feed it back to the classical computer that then can go search and determine, hey, do I need to produce another potential catalyst? From this information, let me find another structure for the quantum computer to evaluate. And we can start to zoom in and explore materials and structures. What molecular structure makes sense for the catalyst. And then this will enable us to produce that catalyst in the industrial setting. And so this is what we would do for example, for carbon fixation or nitrogen fixation or a problem of that sort. But it's very much an integrated capability that we need, right? We need tools not only on the quantum side, right? But we need to connect them and integrate them with the tools we need on the classical side, right? We need advanced compute on the classical side, and we need to be able to integrate that compute with the quantum calculations, with the quantum call. And so that requires innovation in the software stack, the algorithm design, right? And also the system design, right? How do we connect that quantum computer to the classical compute needed? So in terms of bringing down the cost of those algorithms, right? We want to bring down the cost. We want to find algorithms that have super quadratic speedups. And even when you have a super quadratic speedup, you might still need to optimize that algorithm. So to give you an example of that, right? If we take in the case of the problem I just showed around catalysis, right? Around Hamiltonian simulation, a quantum algorithm for Hamiltonian simulation. If we took the algorithm that was invented, right, the first, one of the first algorithms in this space that was invented, what you'll find is that in 2014, right, hey, it's exponentially faster, right? Exponentially faster. It's a polynomial time algorithm, exponentially faster than the classical solution. Polynomial time, but it's really important to look at the degree of your polynomial, right? So when we took that algorithm, we started to pull through the actual costs, as I showed earlier, right? We start to pull through the actual costs. What would it cost to really run this on a machine? Well, it turns out the runtime was 1 billion years, right? It's polynomial time, but it's a high degree. So we needed to bring down the cost of that algorithm. And in particular, these are the numbers for carbon fixation that are shown. We needed to bring down the cost of that algorithm to make it practical, right? To give it that practical quantum advantage. It's a great candidate because we knew it had super quadratic speed up, right? But we still needed to bring down the cost. And so through a series of both theoretical improvements as well as optimization of the underlying circuits of the underlying quantum algorithm operations themselves, right? We started to bring it down. We got it down over the course of many, several years here, down to a runtime of roughly a month. And what we did here is we used a combination of theory and tools, right? Actually programming, writing the algorithm in the Azure Quantum ecosystem, for example. And by writing down the algorithm and starting to run it, simulate it on certain sizes, run different parts of it, understand the cost, estimate the resources required for the algorithm. We were able to identify where we could start to improve that algorithm, how we could optimize the operations. And we were able to achieve this 10 orders of magnitude reduction. And so now this is a practical application and one that we should look to, one that we will want to target as an early workload for a quantum machine. Now, how do we go about doing that, right? It's a mix of theory and development, right? So we took those algorithms and we wrote them down. We programmed them. That doesn't mean we ran it on a machine, right? We don't have a machine that can run that algorithm yet, right? It needs more than 1 million physical qubits, but we can start to run it on small, right? We can run small instances of it today, right? We can estimate how many resources will it require, right? We can program it and understand what do the operations look like, send it through a compiler and optimize it. We can hand optimize it, right? So we did all of these things with this algorithm that I just showed you, and we're able to bring that cost down. So we need to do this with more quantum algorithms, right? And we also need to develop more quantum algorithms. So with Azure Quantum, with this stack, with this ecosystem that we have in the cloud, it enables you to build, right? Build out your algorithm. You can develop it in Q#, which is our quantum, it's a quantum focused programming language we've developed that really allows you to express scaled quantum algorithms. But if you enjoy using Cirq or Qiskit, right, OpenQASM, you can do all of that right in Azure Quantum as well, right? So you can choose your favorite language, your favorite tools. It integrates with Azure Quantum. You can develop in Visual Studio, VS Code, Jupyter Notebooks. We have extensive libraries available. So you can build your algorithm, right? And then you can integrate it over and connect it to many different classical capabilities, right? This is all built in Azure. So you have at your fingertips all the Azure resources. Maybe it's a storage resource. Maybe you want to use machine learning, classical machine learning in conjunction with your quantum algorithm. Maybe you want to use classical, chemistry packages, right? All of that is also available through Azure, through the cloud, and can integrate with your quantum compute needs. And then you can test your algorithm, test your program, test your quantum circuit, right? And you can test it on a simulator, like a state simulator, an open system simulator that enables you to model noise. You can test it out on real hardware. Or you could estimate how many resources will this require, right? Which is what we did in the previous case. How many qubits, how many operations? Then you can really profile it, right? And understand, oh, this is the function that uses the most operations. Let me go optimize that one. And so through all of this, right, you can really learn, how should we develop algorithms? How can we improve them? What should we be bringing forward as potential candidates for early deployment, right? Early execution on hardware. And maybe we can bring in the time, the size of the machine needed for practical quantum advantage. And you can run on real hardware, right? So small instances can be run on real hardware today. There's a variety of hardware available in Azure Quantum. And what I love is that with that same quantum code, you write your program once and it'll compile. You can then deploy it against simulators, resource estimators, or hardware. And that same code, right? You don't have to change your code to operate on different types of targets. It's the same code, right? The compiler does it for you. The stack does it for you. So you can run on Quantinuum's hardware, IonQ, QCI, and Rigetti are both will be lighting up soon in Azure Quantum. So let me give some examples of using Azure Quantum and using these tools to further your research in quantum computing and the innovation needed, right? So here's an example we did with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, where they wanted to understand the excited states of water. And here, describing the excited states of complex molecules, it's very important for science. This would be used, for example, to understand how we could control energy capture, photochemical processes, photocatalytic hydrogen production from water, for example. So really important processes to understand, photoactivation processes. And we want to better understand those. So we want to understand, like, what would a quantum computer be able to do in this space, right? So here, right, you express your molecular structure. It all starts with, a simulation of a molecular structure. So you start with your molecular structure, right? You could express that, for example, through a Jupyter notebook here. And then you connect that with some of those classical compute needs you have to understand the Hamiltonian parameters and the trial states to send to the quantum computer. And with that, we've connected to NWChem and NWChemX, which is a state-of-the-art computational package for chemistry that has been developed by Pacific Northwest National Lab. And that can use, for example, the Azure HPC capability. And so you can run these very extensive classical calculations to get those Hamiltonian and trial states, those parameters. You send them over to your quantum computer or your quantum simulator, for example. So say you want to understand what this is going to cost. The hardware can't run the full size yet. You can simulate it, you can resource estimate it, or you can run a small instance on quantum hardware. And so this is an example of a set of research done on understanding what would be required for a quantum machine to understand core excited states of water. And so here they ran in simulation, quantum phase estimation, and understood that quantum computers will help with this problem. As another example, Azure Quantum has been used, for example, with QNASYS and ENEOS. And this was run on the Honeywell system, now Quantinuum, where here the goal was to really develop an analysis of this end-to-end molecular vibration, understanding, right, really simulating the molecular vibration modes of water and methanol here. And what they wanted to know was, does the quantum simulation match the known values we have? And so here they used Azure Quantum. They used Azure Quantum to understand this, and then produced using Azure Quantum and deploying on the real hardware from Honeywell in this case, deploying that and seeing if they could match the classical compute calculations they had. And so, here, why would you want to do this? Well, this helps. These vibration spectrums are used to identify chemical compounds. You want to understand different transitional structures, right, in these chemical reactions, understand thermodynamic quantities like the free energy, right? And so here they've done that using Azure Quantum and using, rather than quantum phase estimation here, using a VQE example, and then deploying it through Azure Quantum on the Honeywell now Quantinuum system. As another example, you can use Azure Quantum in a very different way, right? So we really focused on the algorithmic understanding in the previous two examples, but you can also use it to understand, for example, characterization of hardware, right? Or what you might, also gate set tomography is an example, right? So if you take, for example, here, the pigsty package, this is a package for gate set tomography that's been developed. And you can take this package and then you can connect, in this case, you can connect this up with Azure Quantum and the tools in Azure Quantum, so you can express it, for example, in Q# and use our open system simulator that enables you to model different noise on the system. And you can also pull those noise models from QTIP, another package. And from there, you can simulate and understand the, what should this operation or this circuit look like under noise. You can do that in full simulation mode. And then you can also run that exact same set of operations on the hardware. And then you can compare and contrast, right? So here you can begin to characterize hardware performance using Azure Quantum, right? And deploying against various hardware to do, gate set tomography or randomized benchmarking, or, choose the process you want to do. But here you can really compare simulation and hardware. And that's one of the advantages of Azure Quantum and the single piece of code, right? Being able to target many things. Now, we've also learned, right, through quantum computing, right, there's just, as we started to study quantum devices and we studied quantum algorithms, we also saw that some of these processes you can emulate, right? So as we looked at optimization, I mentioned earlier, it looks like the crossover time for optimization is like a decade, right? That's not what we thought several years ago, right? Several years ago, we thought optimization might be a great candidate for quantum computing. But the reality is as we dug into it, we realized we can simulate or emulate, if you will, we can emulate some of that behavior classically. So the speed up we get from the quantum machine ends up being less because we gain some of it just with a new classical algorithm, right? And we call this quantum inspired optimization, right? So by looking at how quantum behaviors, how quantum mechanics handles things, namely quantum tunneling, right? In the quantum case, when you're looking at optimization of a cost, you would tunnel, right? You'd be able to tunnel through a barrier, tunnel through, whereas classically we would, hill climb or do some thermal jump, right? But it turns out we can do something in between on a classical machine, right? We can emulate that quantum tunneling behavior and do something in between that we call quantum inspired optimization. And then we can run that algorithm on classical hardware. So this is something where you get some of the benefits of that, of that quantum behavior classically today. So this is really a quantum related technology, right? Quantum inspired optimization has come from understanding quantum devices, studying quantum algorithms. And from this, we get a better classical solution. So we also offer a whole set of optimization solvers in Azure Quantum, right? Where you can take and represent these problems, integrate, test, and run several different types of solvers here. And some examples of this, right? You can improve materials designs with optimization. If you want to understand, for example, here, OTI Lumionics, they're interested in understanding organic LED, right? Heads-up displays. They've been able to use Azure Quantum and the optimization solvers here to improve and enable screening of a larger pool of candidates, right? They don't have to build all of these in production, right? In test. So they use this in conjunction with machine learning to produce a set of candidates for heads-up display materials. And this has been able to dramatically improve and increase the number of candidates they can look at. As another example, in MRI, with Case Western Reserve University, we've been able to use optimization to improve the MRI scan speeds. So, if you have an MRI, typically it's very long. You hear these, loud noises of the pulse sequences. It can take a really long time. And with quantum inspired optimization, we've been able to make those scan times 4 times faster, or improve the image by 50%, which means being able to detect if a chemotherapy mechanism is working early in that process. So really exciting to see, basically speeding up those MRIs means you might not might not have to sedate someone to go into an MRI like a child, or it means you could have that many more people being able to have received scans that need them, or better detection, right? If the diagnosis, the mechanism of improvement is working, right? And we can also minimize traffic, right? With optimization, you can improve traffic. Here's an example where these quantum-inspired optimization methods can reduce the congestion by 73% or improve your commute time by 8%. In this case, this is showing an example in Seattle. So I think we're, yeah. Oops. Hi, Anne. Yeah. So I think I'll wrap up there. I wanted to mention much of this is possible with something called the quantum intermediate representation, which is an open source representation built on LLVM, which enables us to take many languages and map them to many different hardware. And so QIR is open source. There's now a foundation through the Linux Foundation around this. Encourage you to check that out. And finally, I want to mention that we have many partners and affiliates working with us, working to bring quantum computing forward for the world. And we now have free credits. So please go try Azure Quantum. You can apply for up to $10,000 in credits for your research and innovation. But we also just announced last week that everyone has $500 of free credits on the hardware. So if you haven't run on a quantum computer, you haven't developed a piece of code, now's your chance. It's free. No strings attached, right? So if you haven't run a program on a quantum machine, you can do that today through Azure Quantum, and you get $500 to run on both IonQ and Quantinuum. And with that, I will close and open up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see the cross section and the entire the link between the software and the hardware and how they're both working together to build these solutions. We only have a really short time for questions. Actually, we're already over time. So if you don't manage to answer all these questions, I invite the conversations to continue on the Whova app. The most upvoted question right now would be to know about control systems, in particular, who manufactures the cryo CMOS used in the cryo control.
So we have a whole, I can work to get the paper posted. There's a paper that describes all the details on that on the archive by David Riley. So if you look up David Riley, it's our team in Australia that has developed the cryogenic CMOS control system. And there are a series of papers on the archive there. If you look up David Riley and the latest papers, you will find all the details you're looking for.
Thanks. And maybe just quickly, do you have an idea how the energy requirements of building and operating the practical quantum computer compared to a classical computer?
Yeah, so, here in our energy requirements are, overall moderate, right? So we're working within, we have a dilution refrigerator that obviously has to be plugged in and operating. But other than that, the energy requirements are moderate. Our big concerns are the thermal load within the fridge. How do you design and architect the system given the different thermal loads you're looking at there? As we scale up, we do need to consider, I think that's one of the biggest things to consider is how are we going to handle scaling up, right? As you have more heat in the fridge, right? It's going to noise, add noise to the system. So really looking at those thermal loads, the noise loads, how much electronics you have to get in, that's really one of the key considerations.
Thanks a lot. We have to stop there.
Thank you.
Good to have you, Dr. Savary.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Le prochain invité est Gordon Harling, président de CMC Microsystem. Mr. Harling will be presenting the Colton Prize. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was just busy applying for my credits. Yes, I'm here today to present the Douglas R. Colton Medal for Research Excellence. This medal was established many years ago in honor of the founding president of CMC Microsystems, or the Canadian Microelectronics Consortium, and the Colton Medal is CMC's premier award. Researchers' contributions must notably improve our understanding of or demonstrate novelty in micro and nano research. And the competition is open to faculty, students, or alumni who successfully completed a postgraduate degree in a Canadian university within the previous 3 calendar years. It comes with a generous monetary prize of $4,500, and I'm keen to find out what the winner is going to spend that on. And I'm proud to present the winner of the 2021 Colton Medal. Her name is Taliana Huff. So we all know that transistors in chips are pushing against fundamental physical limits, and they're also having problems with power generation. So Taliana looked to solve this problem at the atomic level, designing computer circuits made from precisely placed atom-sized quantum dots. Given her research, we thought that Quantum Days was a great opportunity to present the award. So CMC is very involved in providing resources for quantum computing in Canada, and we think that Canada has the potential to be global leaders in quantum thanks to contributions like Taliana's. It's my pleasure to invite Taliana Huff to say a few words. There she is.
Hello, would it be okay if I had a few slides for this as well?
Yeah, but we only have limited.
You're the winner. Go for it.
Okay, I swear I will keep this like super quick. So yeah, my name is Talina. First of all, thank you so much for this award. I am truly honored to be receiving this for my PhD work. Honestly, like I don't even have the words to express how grateful I am. It really is an honor. And so I was told I have a few minutes to talk, and I swear I will keep this under the 5 minutes I'm allotted, but I thought I would give like a quick elevator presentation just to give everybody like a flavor for what my research was about. And so basically, like Gord said, we focused on trying to build atomic electronics from quantum dots. And so here I have them called silicon dangling bonds, but they are quantum dots. And my research focused around just like looking at ways that we could do error correction when we're making them, just to make sure that they end up the way that we want. We did some proof of concept designs of logical gates just to show that they worked. And then we started looking at noise sources in its electrostatic environment that might destabilize them. And so let's see. Yeah, so you're probably asking, what is a dangling bond? So like I said, we would work on a silicon substrate that was otherwise hydrogen terminated. And then what we could do is we could go in and we could preferentially remove the hydrogen atoms that were capping the individual silicon atoms with atomic precision, as well as, I guess, put the hydrogen back when we felt like it to erase them. So that was the error correction part. And the cool thing about dangling bonds is they act like quantum dots and they can hold a net electron's worth of charge. And so what we did is we would couple these quantum dots together with our really good patterning and erasure technologies, and we would move the electrons around in it to simulate the transmission of binary information. So here's 2 quantum dots that we put together, and the electron that is hosted between these quantum dots is equally as likely to be in the left or right side. I always like to analogize these as the quantum dots are buckets and the electron is water in the buckets. And what we can do is we can force that electron to choose a side. And so what we do is we put a electrostatic perturber that also has a negative charge over here. And of course, like charges repel. So the electron now definitely wants to sit in the left of this pair. And we just say that's a binary 0. We're encoding the binary information for these little atomic circuits into where the electron likes to sit in these coupled quantum wells. And so, like I said, we can erase them. So what I can do is I can go and I can erase this electrostatic perturber, move it to the other side, toggle the binary information in this, and make the electron want to sit in the right side of this double well potential now. And now we have a binary 1. And so we kind of just use that basic idea and we like design some cool logic gates. So here you can see a logical OR gate that we made out of these dangling bonds and some wires over here on the right, where once again, you can see if we put an asymmetric charge input here, it'll make all the pairs switch to zeros, kind of like falling dominoes. Or we can move it to the other side, like down here, and make them all turn into a 1. And so we called this binary atomic silicon logic, or BASIL to be cutesy. And yeah, we just decided to make sure that these kinds of like little logic operations worked. And just to kind of give you an update about why they're great, they use very little energy, so about 100 times less power than a conventional transistor that would store that binary information. They don't generate tons of waste heat because they are very power efficient. You're not flowing a current, you're rearranging where an electron likes to sit in these wells. And so we can switch them really fast, potentially up to hundreds of gigahertz. And of course, these things are like literally like the absence of an atom on a surface. So they're incredibly small, and we're really working with like some of the smallest building blocks one could imagine. Just to show off a little, here's like a cool 32 atom pattern that we made in our lab, just showing that we really have this like level of control and precision over the surface. And as of right now, now that we have the proof of concept stuff going, this company in Edmonton called Quantum Silicon Incorporated is kind of taking these ideas and trying to make it into commercial products that you could integrate into your everyday devices. So with that, I'd just like to thank everybody. So of course, I did all the research at the University of Alberta. So thank you to them for providing the resources that we needed and the PhD program for me to go through. I worked under Robert Wolko at the University of Alberta. He was a wonderful supervisor and gave us a wonderful environment to conduct this research in. We worked really, really closely with Nanotechnology Research Centre Canada that helped us through developing a lot of this technology. Thank you to Quantum Silicon for picking it up and trying to make what was, started as a research idea into like real products. Thank you to Nano Canada for having Quantum Days to let me talk about this and give me a platform to receive my award. And of course, the biggest thanks to CMC Microsystems who funded this award and selected me for it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Anne. We're very, very proud. Good work.
Congratulations on behalf of the entire Quantum Days community. This concludes our session. I'd like to thank once more all the speakers and congratulate once more our awardee. You're now invited to visit the posters, exhibitors, sponsors, and the career fair. And I've been asked to remind you that this is accessible on your Whova web app on the menu on the left-hand side or on your Whova app and the menu at the bottom of the screen. A reminder that the parallel sessions start in approximately 1 hour and 10 minutes. That's at 2:15 p.m. Eastern, followed by what promises to be a very interesting panel at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. See you there.